Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety. Today, my guests are Dr. Sharon Niv, a cognitive psychologist, researcher, and co-founder of Joyous, a public benefit company focused on expanding access to mental health care through innovative therapeutic approaches, and Nikita Mehta, a recovery coach, yoga teacher, somatic healer who has worked in the field for 6 years. So today we are going to talk about all of the patients that Dr. Niv has overseen treatment for with her daily low-dose ketamine therapy for conditions like anxiety, depression, and trauma, and how her approach focuses on what's known as the psycholytic state. And of course, we will also talk about sobriety. So welcome, guys. So for listeners meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and what led you to work in this space?
Sure. So Joyous was founded about 4 years ago, and the hope was to increase access to some of these medications that we're finding are kind of a new hope in mental health, right? We've had SSRIs, Prozac, and stuff for about 30 years, and they have some level of efficacy, but they seem to work more in curbing symptoms. And it seems like the newer approach, new old, because of course psychedelics did not emerge in the last 20 years, but renewed interest, research interest has, can really help with unlocking some of the root causes of the emotional suffering that we undergo. And so the hope for Joyous was to really increase accessibility. And the way that we decided to go about it was with this very low dose stuff, because while there are options out there for the higher dose regimens of ketamine, we weren't sure that everyone who'd be coming to us would be ready for that. It can be like a big epistemically transformative experience to have this big psychedelic journey, perhaps an ego death. Not everyone wants that or is ready for it, but these low doses, we think of it as a skill building approach. It's very gentle. Go low, go slow is one of our mottos. And you can do a lot of really, really deep work. And that's the background on why Joyous exists. And I'm just a cognitive psychologist with a passion for how to democratize approaches and more available on scale.
Yeah, I'll just qualify myself really quickly. I am a South Asian woman who has suffered with or lived with alcohol use disorder for the past 22 years. I've been in more programs than I really know how to count, have tried the variety of medications that psychiatrists will prescribe in order to curb addictive personalities, and really found that through the psychedelic regimens, especially low dose, um, the aperture, the viewpoint of how I witnessed myself in the stream of life was able to shift. And that is where I really unlocked long-term, I want to call it sobriety, but it's so much more than that, right? Where it unlocked living on a more holistic scale, right? The other thing that I want to say really quickly is that, Sharon comes in with such a wonderful educational viewpoint of psychedelics and all of that, but also from a more emotional space. She has been such a support to me through my recovery journey. And so she does have a wider lens of what it looks like to merge these two spaces. So very, very much rooted in speaking about how low dose ketamine can be a part of a long-term journey to
So, what we're mostly familiar with is the higher psychedelic doses. How do the low doses affect the brain differently?
Okay. Ketamine is a super interesting medication. High enough dose and it's anesthetic, like you're out. They use it for pediatric surgery, and animal surgery and human surgery. But a little bit lower, you get to these K-hole states that can be an ego death, um, and they can be deeply psychedelic. Below that is probably what you would consider the high dose ketamine assisted psychotherapy or ID dosing. And then you're down to the psycholytic. And how they affect the brain differently is that they don't, at these lower doses, they don't take the default mode network completely offline, they loosen it. So let's define what that is. The default mode network is super interesting. It was like discovered serendipitously with uh, MRI scanners when participants were just told, hey, lie there, do nothing. We want to get a baseline. Turns out when you tell a human being, do nothing, the brain doesn't go blank.
No.
You're like thinking about yourself. You're thinking about your to-do list. You're evaluating that thing I said. Did I say it right? You're kind of like running through your narrative of who you are. So that's what's active as default. And they named it the default mode network, is related to our sense of self. So with higher dose ketamine, that can go completely offline, as we said, ego death. With these lower doses, there's a loosening. There's a shift from top down to bottom up in terms of how the brain processes. So I'll break that down too. Top down is how we use our beliefs and our lenses to interpret the world. So we've actually seen that people who tend to have, more anxiety, more depression, if they are shown a face that most people consider neutral, they will interpret that face as threatening. And why? Because they're seeing it through their lenses. That's a top-down view. So all psychedelics, ketamine included, shift the balance to the bottom up. And they do that by reducing the activity in the default mode network that tends to be like, I see the world as I know the world, and allows the senses and the sensory data to be better evaluated and to have a shifted perspective, a reinterpretation of what that is. And so because these low dose states they're so gentle, we consider, like we say ketamine tipsy. It's like these doses that we get at Joyous are the equivalent of a glass and a half of wine in terms of like how altered you'll be. That means you can participate in therapy. Like if you can imagine having a glass of wine and going to therapy, you can have these doses of ketamine and go to therapy as well. The effects are that you're kind of more open and spacious. It's an anesthetic dissociative. And so there is a partial dissociation state. And the way that that's experienced is almost feeling like you're bigger than your body. So all of well, you asked about the brain. We can get to the experiential later. So in the brain, there is that reduction in the default mode network, but there's still the BDNF release, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which just allows, I had a therapist a few weeks ago call it miracle grow for the brain. It allows for synaptogenesis. So what a synapse is there's one neuron and another neuron, and this neuron has a firing. It releases a bunch of chemicals that are received by this neuron, and so the message is continues. So these fingers are called dendrites. They're the ones who receive the neurochemical. What this BDNF does with ketamine is it just grows new dendrites. So instead of 5 fingers, you have 20 out, and that synapse is stronger. That's what ketamine does in the brain. And then we can talk about like all the content that is then important to be intentional with, because what you do matters.
I think the other portion of the brain that ketamine really allows us to reinterpret is the reticular activation system. That for me is and they go hand in hand.
Of course, but yeah.
So often we're witnessing the world through the peephole that was handed to us. You want to talk about epigenetics, right?
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to get the wider view. So right now on Instagram, this is just what I saw because this is what my algorithm is showing me. There's a woman who yesterday put up a picture and she told you before the picture went up, I want you to look for 3 blue items in this photo. Make sure you know what those blue items are. And then she puts up a photo for about 3 seconds. And you are scrambling to find the 3 blue items. And you're saying them over and over. Your mind is laser focused on this task. And when the next screen comes up, it's her. And she says, "What was yellow in the photo?" You didn't look for the yellow thing. The mind was not expansive enough to look for all of the possibility. Instead, was hyperfixated on what we'd been told. Now, that's just an analogy for how we go through life. I'm looking for ways in which I am not meeting expectation because that is the framework that I was given as a child. That leads to a nervous system that is constantly on high alert, looking for danger. How do we, soothe that nervous system as adults in the ways in which society has told us to? You come home from work and you grab a glass of wine. That's just being a good, classy adult.
Society, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works.
It has the effects of acting like a security blanket for our nervous system. But really, what if we just untangled the reticular activation system to instead look for other points of information focus, right? Intrigue. And that's what low dose ketamine does. Just like Sharon was telling you, it doesn't get you to the anesthetic state. Ego death is great in certain circumstances, but we're really looking for like a step back. Think about it like a camera when you open the aperture and all of a sudden the trees are also in the frame. And then who are you when you pull back and the viewpoint that you are looking at your own life through includes the fact that you are made of actual stardust? It just shifts the way that we are interacting, right? That's the joy.
Yeah. It does open those possibilities by shutting down the pre-programmed scripts that just run on autopilot. For like, it gives you a break from, and just like you said, allows you to reinterpret, allows you to take in a much broader perspective, a much broader vantage point of who you are and what's possible.
You know what I love that Sharon just said is that it's equivalent to a glass of wine, right? And I think that sometimes the viewers or the listeners right now are like, but that's what I'm trying to get away from.
Right.
I'm trying
I was thinking that too. I'm like, I can't have a glass of wine. I can't be as fucked up as a glass and a half of wine.
So let's go through that on 2 different levels. The first one is years ago, 10, 15 years ago, traveling through India, and I meet with a guru. I'm crying. Why can I not stop drinking alcohol? And he looked at me so calmly and he said, "What is it about the alcohol that you think is wrong?" And I was like, "Well, it's actively killing me. I'm not living up to my potential." And he was like, the alcohol was just there as the gateway to teach you how to get to a relaxed state, to teach you how to deaden is probably the wrong word, but to quiet the overactive, excitatory mind, to reach that space, to just tap the space of meditation. And he's like, and once it did, your goal was to go off and find a way to create that spaciousness inside of you naturally. That's okay. Alcohol has deleterious effects to our body the second we put it in. When we're taking a step away from that, we don't want to completely forget what it was that we were supposed to learn in that. This is the perfect way to take that step and say, I'm still going to try and tap into a brain that is not being driven by I'm going to call it this, my itty bitty shitty committee, right? Prefrontal cortex, but instead to be able to lean into, oh, the amygdala is triggered. What is it about this that feels scary? How can I learn from that instead of running from it? Right. So I really love that aspect.
Put another way, you can view it as a North Star.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
It shows you what is possible within your nervous system and where you want to get to skillfully. It
Right.
is not meant to be a replacement. We are not replacing one addiction with another. And so that
Yes.
intentionality piece and being extremely aware of you brought in that beautiful acronym escape. We made a course for all Joyous patients. We've had like over 90,000 patients now. It's available. The course is, we first called it How to Have a Healthy Relationship with Addiction. And then I was like, how to have a healthy relationship with life.
Okay.
And because we're all addicted to something, and of course there are different degrees of that. You might be addicted to alcohol, but you might just be addicted to your phone or your boyfriend or your thinking, like, and all of us have unhealthy relationships. And what are some of the signs that we can really notice that let us know that there's a problem here? And you had that acronym ESCAPE, which I think is fantastic. There's escalation. Um,
Oh my
goodness.
gosh, I'm gonna look
Okay.
at right
Well,
now.
it's about escalation. It's about when you find yourself hiding things, when you find that it's interfering with relationships or your commitments, when you find that there's a feeling of like guilt or unease in the body about it. It's just a very clean way of realizing there's an unhealthy relationship here. And we really want to encourage people who are coming in with a history of addiction to do it with a therapist. We have a Joyous for Therapists program where we train your therapist on how to work with these microdoses of ketamine. It's a free program for them. They all need like continuing education credits. We're giving them 10.5, 11.5, excuse me, free continuing education credits. Come learn how to use this medicine because we believe in this so strongly. So for people who have a history of addiction and they are still suffering from depression, anxiety, the effects of their trauma, which is probably why they are struggling or have a history of addiction to begin with, I think it is a very good idea to come in with a therapist,
Definitely.
someone who's able to be in work, someone who's able to ask you the questions like, you have been, taking this ketamine for the last 2 months. How do you feel the relationship is? Do you feel like you're craving it? Do you feel like you'd be nervous if you didn't get to have it today? These are good questions to be able to explore with a therapist. The medicine itself, just like I think you had 2 points and we only got to one. So you're going to go back and do your second point.
Well, you're just bringing up so many good points. And what I want to say once again is like to people who are listening to this podcast, I think it's imperative that we're very honest with ourselves that if you take one thing away, alcohol, it was a very large portion of my life, way it creates a vacuum. And ends up being brought into that vacuum is what we cross addict with. Now they seem benign, right? And I'll remember my very first client that I worked with. She stopped drinking. uh, I think about the 3 month mark. Um, and she was so excited, and she's like, "Thank you so much for your help. Like, I'm so." And I was like, "The work is not done. We have just started. We have just really gotten into it." Because she became an ultra marathoner, and I was like, "You're literally running from your problems." Now, in her mind, it seemed like the trade off was to her benefit, but the things that we cross addict with are not actually viewable to us all the time. We cross addict to work. We cross addict to human connection, which is where AA comes in. We cross addict to you know, building passion projects. Sometimes they are on the outside very
Productive.
positive.
Yeah.
We in, right? Like Sherry's saying, you come in, first of all, the therapist that you need to come in or that you're coming in with does not need to have a medical background in how ketamine works.
We're the medical partners.
Yeah,
The therapist will work.
definitely. To have the mirror, to have someone witness you in that expanded space and then say, what I heard when you were a little bit more open to speaking about somatically what is true for you. This is what I heard, right? This is what you were open to say. And to get that feedback is so powerful. We're not talking about high dose anything. In high dose therapies, sometimes you're doing very much deeper inner work because you're not available to speak about your experience. But low dose is a space where you can really interact with the world around you and have, just like we're saying, a different lens to your own experience, to what is addiction coming in to soothe? I think we all, like, not just people listening to the podcast, but every single one of us can
Self-soothe, absolutely.
but self
Yeah.
soothe. Like, what are we afraid of? What are we looking to replace? All of these things. And when you can get really honest about that, then the agency is back in our corner. That's what we're looking for, right? Agency.
Yeah. I always say that alcohol saved my life for when the time that it was there, because I was so depressed, so anxious, and without any coping skills. And I was working like 14, 16 hours a day. And it was those are the only hours where I had any what I thought was peace. And then obviously alcohol turned into the problem itself. But I sort of, there's these um, journal exercises where I say, like, write a letter to alcohol. And mine is always like, thanks so much for those first 10 years. Those were solid. Like, I was an anxious, socially awkward Indian kid, right? And so it was like, thank you so much for teaching me how to socialize. Speaking of anxiety and depression and results of trauma, how does that emotional accessibility change during the psycholytic state? And do and Joyous always suggest it's done in like a therapeutic environment? Or do you think like, hey, like, should I just start taking some low dose ketamine and like expand my, or I just, for example, I just had therapy like an hour ago. How would therapy have been different if I had been on low dose ketamine? And I loved like the explanation where you guys said it's like opening the aperture to a lens, but can we get even more like granular about this?
Question. Let me just
I
summarize.
asked like 10, and then I also like turned it into something about my therapy. So yeah.
I think that was like, how does the emotional experience change? The second one was, how does therapy look different? And the third was, do you always recommend a therapist or not? Okay, so one at a time. So what happens with emotionality? I'm sure you've read The Body Keeps the Score, or if not, like, or at least familiar with what we understand now about trauma. Trauma gets locked in the body because it was too overwhelming for our systems to process and handle. So it gets locked there and it stays in our system until we can feel it from a sense of, spaciousness and love, and allow it to release and resolve on its own. It's going to be stuck there until we can actually feel it, feel our feelings. Ketamine, with that partial dissociation state and the quieting of the narrative mind, you can really get into a state that one therapist described as a blanket of safety. You can feel your feelings from a state of psychological safety, especially if there's a therapist there. But over 50% of our patients, starting to answer your question two or three, don't have a therapist. Our aim is to be the most affordable ketamine prescriber in America. It's $129 a month. You can't pay a therapist for those, and therapists deserve to be paid. So our aim is accessibility. Over 50% of our patients do not come in with their own therapist, and we believe we have not had adverse events. Things are going well. With 90,000 patients, one or two, but like that's just statistics. It is going very, very well on that front. But we think that having a therapist in the room will only enhance things if people can afford it. And we will take people who've struggled with addiction in the past, but are not currently in a state of addiction. Because we just think that that is the safer thing to do over telehealth, even though there is some interesting research evidence on ketamine specifically used to reduce cravings, both in alcohol use disorder, with cocaine, some mixed evidence with opioids, but it's an interesting and burgeoning field of research that's like not very well fleshed out. So it could be a really good match, even with if your primary indication is substance use disorder, maybe, but not through us. Maybe that's something to do with a psychiatrist. Our primary indication, anxiety, depression, and trauma. But people who have a history of addiction and who want to work on their anxiety, depression, trauma, ketamine can be very appropriate. I still think it's probably a better idea to have a therapist in the picture.
Oh.
It's not necessarily a requirement, but it is a good idea. And so, did I answer all those questions?
I want to piggyback.
Please do.
Yes.
The beauty of what she's saying. The first thing is accessibility. Not everyone has the accessibility to a therapist. And even if you do have a therapist, so I'm going to jump around just for a moment. The one thing I tell my clients all the time is that I'm well aware that even though most of them have worked with me for multiple years, there is still a mask that they wear in front of me. There's a way that they want to be perceived by me, run their experience through a filter before it comes out. Because I call it out so often, that mask is somewhat softened. Low-dose ketamine pushes that mask down even more. The availability that you have to be honest on a cellular level, because you're not fractionating your trauma, you're not fractionating the ways in which you want to speak about an experience, is very palpable. So I will say that first. The second thing is that if you are coming in because at the moment, paying for a therapist is not accessible, right? And healthcare in America is a conversation that we should talk about at length when we're talking about recovery. It's not that you're coming in and all of a sudden you're being handed a dissociative medication and being left. No, Joyous has done such a good job at creating bite-sized, very accessible pieces of psychoeducation so that you have a greater understanding of your nervous system, right? There are the course that we created together is created for you to take your low dose, and then I will lead you through a 10-minute guided meditation. Each meditation builds on the other one. What we say in the course is you pause on that one meditation as many times as you feel like you are experiencing an opening of experience for yourself, right? It lands in one final meditation that really can unearth just, you brought it up and then Sharon brought it up. Anxiety, depression, what was trauma?
Yeah.
I don't know a single person who isn't addicted to something because of their inability to understand things are laying in their body, what the precipice of them are, and how to move them through their experiential body. So, I mean, all of it ties back to, yeah. And going back to what, are we saying that every single person should do this? Absolutely not. Right? Are we saying that it provides one stream to greater accessibility of mental health shift? Yeah, I think so.
Definitely. Yeah. We were going to talk about the dosing. It's between 10 and 120 milligrams, and it's a buccal administration. Buccal means cheek, so it's between your cheek and your gum. It kind of like absorbs like tobacco snuff or whatever, and it's about a 25% bioavailability. So the highest dose you would get is about 30 milligrams into your bloodstream. That's, again, the equivalent of like a glass and a half of wine. You don't develop alcohol use disorder by drinking a glass of wine a day, and you don't develop ketamine use disorder by taking that amount either, right? So these are not dosings that necessarily will produce a physical dependency, but having the intentionality piece around it. Why am I doing this?
Right.
What am I trying to get at? And I'm trying to get at a new relationship, a new understanding around the sources of my pain. Like you were just talking about. What you were saying reminded me of a quote that we have. I'll maybe you can put it in the show notes. We have a little testimonial reel for Joyous for therapists. And one of the patients literally says, I felt that feeling of I need to say what's true for me. I need to speak what's really real. And I mean, it's such a power. And she says, I was in therapy for years. I feel like I couldn't get at the heart of the matter, and I could.
Yeah.
I could just say it. So like the insight, the truth, the new perspectives, the spaciousness in which you can form new mental habits. You're doing this for a reason. You're not, if you're coming in here to replace your wine with ketamine,
Yeah.
maybe don't. Maybe don't.
Maybe don't. Yeah. Yeah. And so, how do you see ketamine helping people process that underlying trauma that may be driving their addictive behaviors?
Perfect. So what we end up seeing is that there are a couple of basic skills that are really useful to get before you really start diving into the deep stuff. And some of that just comes naturally without any cultivation. But those skills are spaciousness, like really what IFS model calls self, the ability to drop into your true nature, which is calm, which is accepting and curious, self-compassionate, non-judgmental. It wants to understand what's going on. Ketamine is just like a way to drop into that with so much ease. So that some therapists work to cultivate it with their clients, but some clients are like, no, I've been taking this medicine for the last 3 weeks and I'm there. Like I don't need that. Another one is kind of there's a meditation from a guy named Paul Condon at the Center for Sustainable Compassion, which is just called the field of care. And the field of care, I was recently at Art of Accomplishment. They call it like dropping into your inherent goodness, which is, it's the ability to make contact with the caring universe that's available to all of us. And it's cultivated from, you really can. And there are doorways to this. This meditation asks you to either think of a benefactor, someone that you just want to be happy, sometimes a young child, like a grandparent, a puppy, the easy person from loving kindness meditation. Or you can imagine a time when you were the benefactor in the presence of like a grandparent or a teacher or a parent that you just felt so loved by and so cared for. Or you can imagine watching a scene that kind of restores your faith in humanity, generosity, kindness, a soldier coming home to their dog, whatever it is that brings that up for you. Or like a universal archetypal figure, Mother Mary, Mr. Rogers. Like we all have our own conception, Kuan Yin, of who is like a face of compassion. So you kind of get more in contact with that and you're able to call it up with more ease. And so in ketamine sessions, what's really helpful is to have both of those tools on mind. Your sense of there's care in the universe and the sense of self and spaciousness. And from there, you can start to make contact with the things that scare you. And if there's a loving thing there, just being like, hey, do you notice that I'm here with you? I'm holding space. You're not alone. Let's go there. Let's see what images arise when you really feel into that deep sense of loneliness that you're trying to resist feeling because it feels like it's going to annihilate you. Let's feel into it. And you might get images. I did a session like this recently with another coach I worked with, Joyous, and she was like, all right, feel into it. And the images I got were like just dying in a desert. I felt like I was a baby dying in a desert. She's holding, letting it run through me, and I'm crying and feeling the feelings. And then they release. And when the feelings move through your body, underneath you usually will find something quite tender. Yeah. And something quite loving. And there's a real relief there. Like, it may not be that I'll never feel lonely again, but something that was just gripping me releases when you're able to really feel into it, that spaciousness.
One of those things I found for me was really hard to let go of was my identity. And so I think a lot of people feel when they first get into recovery, they need to sort of rebuild their identity. I had an identity where I was like, work hard, play hard. I was super fun. And so how can ketamine therapy help you rebuild an identity in recovery, or can it?
I don't think it's yours.
I got this tattoo in India this December, and it says Aham Brahmasmi, because we get hyper fixated on the I am. I am a yoga teacher, which means that there's a little box that I've created and all of the things that I think are associated with being a yoga teacher. I'm going to step into it. Now I'm wearing my Lululemons and I'm speaking in my very calm, soothing voice. And I only listen to East Forest. And, I drink a lot of kombucha. There are aspects that we start to incorporate into our lives because they go along with the I am. And in reality, we are everything. So when you talk about rebuilding and a sense of identity afterward, then how ketamine can really assist in that. I want to rewind just a little bit and say that it's assisting in allowing us to think about the vastness of human potential instead of having us create another little box that, right? Because so often, then what we do, and I mean this with all the respect in my heart, but we'll get to the other side, and all of a sudden, I'm a person in recovery. I'm, oh my gosh, I'm going to step into that. And now I wear all of my AA pins and I go to conferences and I drink really terrible coffee because like this is, I mean that with lightness. I go to things. I have, I've been in this world since I was 18 years old. Um, what would it feel like to not need another I am? Just arrive. In order to do that, you have to touch it. You have to actually be able to, right? So I just got back.
You were
Just
different.
a conference, yeah, and I was at Esalen at the same time. And Esalen is the birthplace of the human potential movement. It's also the grounds of a lot of psychedelic research, right? And one of the things I think when I mention to people, I'm just going to qualify and say that many of my clients have used the Joyous protocol because I have asked them to. um, a lot of people will say things like, well, I've done ketamine before. Well, I've done this psychedelic medication before. I just heard it when I was at Esalen, right? Well, I don't really understand why I would go and see someone or do a hero's journey. I've done X amount before by myself. So different. So different. Even the container of having a microdose and then knowing that there are meditations on the app or whatever, you have this safety to let go. Now, when you bring your therapist in, you really can sit back and allow the experience to be much more encompassing because you're not trying to hold space and time, right? So this is and we're not saying go for a hero's dose of ketamine. We're saying do a small and a spaciousness approach to it so that what is able to flow through you is not you trying to fit into the box of I am. Even in front of our therapists sometimes, I am educated, I am kind, I am on the right side of the track. What would it be like to step back and be like, no, I'm human? You know, when we talk about it, and when I was thinking about this last night, we're also not saying don't be sad, don't be frustrated, don't be depressed. Be all of those things.
See the totality of your human experience. Yeah.
What ketamine does on these low dose scales is that then you can hold it. You can like hold your depression in your hands. It is not a shroud over the front of your face. Instead, you hold it and you're like, how lovely that I get to experience this. And now let me peel back one layer and see what's the message, right? To your point, I just want to call something out that you said that was so beautiful. I tell all clients because I'm telling myself, right? I really believe that each and every single one of them has come into my life because I get to say to them what I desperately need to hear for myself. It is the joy of being in the position that I am. I like started using substances addictively from day one and went to rehab for my first time at 18, right? So I know all of the pain. I've had a lot of consequences. And I tell them because I'm telling myself that you will wake up one day and you will look back and you will say, thank you.
Mm.
Whereas it brought me to a place where I can actualize utilizing, low dose ketamine and being like, that was in my cellular structure for a long time, whether we're talking epigenetics or this lifetime trauma, because there's a lot of them. Yeah. But I'm not shying away. And my addiction brought me to a place where I was willing to utilize the external medication. But we have the availability. If you have brought yourself here, right, for listening to this podcast, so sobriety is important to you because some substance brought you to your knees. And if we were really to pull the view back, every single person has that experience. Some substance has brought you to your knees, even if that substance is work, right? You are ready to really be in the experiential body of
Just deep learnings, just deep explorations. Come into love and appreciate it.
Sorry, when you said that, we've been friends for a while now. So sometimes she says things and I'm like, I know where you're going. I saw us as little space adventurers in our full spacesuits, like going off into the cosmos together. Yes, running our fingers through the Milky Way. Like, how could you be stuck in this body when the calcium that is your bones was created in the Big Bang? But you need the accessibility to be there, right? And sometimes our brains, the way that they are, the neural networks and the ways that they were laid out, want to see things as cut and dry. We went to lots of schooling to teach us to only think in those frameworks. Expand.
What about people who, like, what would you say to people that feel stuck in current recovery programs? Let's take, for example, AA. How can ketamine help people that are feeling stuck or have tried a few different things and don't feel like it's working?
Plateaus are like the number one selling point that we give to therapists. Well, amongst others, but like we really tell them if you have clients who feel like they've been stuck for a long time,
Yeah.
this might be a good thing to try
Mm.
because so that that partial dissociation state, that quiets down the narrative thinking, it's just this perfect opportunity for new perspectives to come. And oftentimes, like we mentioned, this client saying, I had to say what's true. I felt that feeling. I needed to say what was real. Oftentimes we don't even tell ourselves this.
100%.
Most of the time, the stuff we don't want to think about, that we don't want to admit, that we don't want to own, is actually still somewhat it's subconscious. Like we're kind of aware, it's not even the unconscious, it's right on the ketamine will get you to that insight.
It's a self-protective mechanism, right? Plateaus, walls, all of those things that we hit, especially in recovery programs.
We're afraid of what we might uncover. We're afraid of the old that we're not ready to feel yet.
Well, I call it, and I say this with grace, and I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but it's because it was a part of my life. I call it the battered woman syndrome. Why do we keep going back to the abuser, right? And it's because we have developed a sense of, I know how to survive this system. I know what to do next, and I know the arc that it will follow. So there's predictability in it, right? There's predictability in our recovery systems if we have been doing the same system over and over again. Nothing wrong with that. Security is a very vital portion of life, right? There's a saying in AA, there's a saying in a lot of different therapy modalities that you can't unlearn from the mind that learned. You can't.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the image that I get in that is that there's very much a brick wall in front of you, and you're trying to punch your way through. You with your hands have laid the bricks, and now you with your own hands are trying to remove the brick. No, you can't. Those are the tools that you use to build. You need a stick of dynamite.
Mm.
Is dynamite gonna like the whole building? No, it's just gonna topple the wall in front of you so that you have access to the room next door. And then what can you do in the room next door? Right? So in no way, I think, is this promo for doing your program if you've plateaued. And instead, it's like, I'm a yoga teacher, right? And I teach a very physical class. And there are places where people have plateaued in my class, and I need to say, now I need you to go to Pilates so that you can start to access different muscles and then come back. Your arm balances will be different. Completely different modality. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Just like, why wouldn't we utilize everything that is at our disposal? Why does it need to be another way that we are placing ourselves in tiny boxes of I am? I only do A. Right. Right? I've like stepped into the box. I am doing all the things now. And, these psychopharmaceutical uh, technologies have been brought to us because we as a humanity are ready to see the bigger picture.
Mm.
On a consciousness level, right? We have the support. 200, 300 years ago, I think it would have been like singular people going and being like, I see the point of this. Like, you're crazy, right? There's an entire community that is saying, can you feel into and trust that behind the wall, you will still be safe? Yeah, consciousness community is really, really so beautiful that we live in the day and age that we live in. That's right. It's amazing how like things are in parallel getting more dangerous and more promising on this in the same time. I think for the same reasons, we're
Mhm.
connected. Their information can travel so quickly that anyone who's drawn to the consciousness world will come upon what they need to hear. And of course, anyone who needs to get radicalized will also.
Yeah.
We really do call into consciousness what we're ready to see. What we're ready to see. I'm going to tell a really quick story. I'll be very quick about it. But I was teaching a yoga class yesterday. Usually my classes are very full, but yesterday was 75 degrees and sunny in San Francisco. Unheard of. I wouldn't have been in a studio, right? Like, so it was a smaller class. It gave me more availability to speak to every single student. There was a new student in class. I was feeling beforehand a moment of disconnection because the class was smaller. However, I've been working on these spaces of feeling interconnected, of knowing that there is no separation between myself and the next individual, that we are all these movements. After class, a girl comes up to me and she says, that was a really lovely class. And I said, your practice is beautiful. Where do you practice? She said, I haven't been practicing for a while, but I used to practice in India. Great. What part of India? She says, Pune. Wonderful. My family is from Mumbai, from Santa Cruz West. She said, oh, my family actually is from Santa Cruz West. Great. We live off of Lincoln Road. She said, we live off of Lincoln Road. And she said, oh, we live behind the St. Lawrence School. And I said, I live behind the St. Lawrence School. And she said, 2 buildings back. And I said, 2 buildings back. I said, did you grow up in Saket? She grew up in Saket, the apartment right underneath us. She said, my parents' names, 1.8 billion people just living in India. No, I'm a little wrong off on those numbers, just a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. You're
In my class telling me my parents' names on the other side of the globe. We call into consciousness what it is that we are willing to push out. I was witnessing connection, even though my fear body wanted to see disconnection in the beginning, but that's not what I've been working with. That's not what I have touched into. And so what is being mirrored back to me is that there is no separation.
Keep getting tingles in this
I
podcast.
know.
That this woman grew up in this, there's only 8 apartments in that building. How insane, right? But it's not. Once you have had the step back, right? We
Yeah.
just need to step back and witness the pulsing, beautiful interconnectedness, all of it.
Is part of that step back self-compassion in the moments that you feel disconnected? Do you have compassion for that person? And that's sometimes something I find that's missing in addiction recovery, right? Especially in the concept of moral failings and affliction. But how do you see that as a piece?
Actually, I think this is yours, but no, we think of self-love and self-compassion as absolute cornerstones of what need to happen for real to occur. Because if it's all up in the mind, it doesn't go deep enough for actual healing.
Right.
Real healing involves the emotional body, and it involves like deep somatic body too. And if that body feels unloved and unsafe, it's not going to go all the way through. We're actually building a program called Love Yourself University, which has been a little bit on hold as I try to get the Joyous for Therapists program like on its MVP stage right now. But that's the long-term plan, is how do we personalize kinds of exercises, meditations, prompts, and other activities. Maybe for someone it's going for a walk in the woods, right? Like, but that will really bring about a sense of deep self-love, and yes, it can start with self-compassion, right? If we just want to define that, self being the care for your own suffering, that it can start there. It can be easier to go with, I see myself suffering. I wish for that to stop, genuinely, with warmth, not because I want to beat myself up. Stop suffering already, you jerk. With a real, like the way you would want a small puppy to come out from the cold. That's the kind of self-compassion for yourself too. And self-love, like celebrating yourself, appreciating yourself, enjoying yourself, can be the layer that comes after we are able to at least start with real self-compassion. Different people, different trajectories. Maybe someone starts somewhere else, but often enough you see it start with self-compassion.
I hear agency in that, right? And the reason agency in that is the reason that I think that it's really important that you have a somatic practice is just like Sharon was saying, so much of this is held in the physical body, especially trauma, right? We don't know how to access it. So somatic work is very helpful in moving those experiences to the surface so that we can actually start to work with them. And when you start doing somatic work, so you start doing Tai Chi, yoga, running, whatever it is, right? You recognize that you are in charge of your own suffering. If you're in my class and I'm asking you to do chair pose, and I've gone off on telling a story, and you're still in chair pose, any point in time, if your suffering is too great, you can stand up. But it's not until you're in class and you drop the ego and you start to listen to self-compassion that you recognize that that agency has always been yours. And it is an analogy for everything we do when we step off the mat. So it starts in places that we can have palpable experiences of it, and then it becomes something that we play with externally. Just to piggyback on what Sharon was saying, the other thing about Joyous is like, she's really talking about how it's not a one size fits all experience. And so often other systems are one size fits all. These are, I'm trying to not make it about AA, but These are the steps that you're going to do. This is the order you're going to do it. And no, that's
Yeah.
wrong. Do it this way.
Yeah.
But that the personalized experience, the walk in the woods, the taking the microdose and being in nature versus the taking of the microdose and laying on the floor with music on versus taking the microdose and speaking with a therapist, those are all personalized ways that you start to work with your system. And it's one of the things that, we just talked about, um this year especially, I'm only working with high achieving people in addiction. But last year, my entire focus was creating systems for San Francisco's Tenderloin, right? And the way that sometimes
And that's, if people aren't familiar, that is very, very homeless and very low income, really distressed population.
right, where there's a lot of addiction, we're seeing it, seeing a lot of on the street, it's in your face. One, it gives us a lot of compassion for what people must be going through. But I think one of the ways that we sometimes don't address the needs of that population is we give them a one size fits all approach. When so much of what they need is just listen to the trauma story, right? Access what this one person needs in order to feel safe in their nervous system. Those are personalized experiences. So not just that we're doing it with that population, also every population is going to have barriers to how they witness what they need in order to move forward, right? We don't always see it for ourselves. And so that personalized approach is very important. And that's what Joyous offers.
I love that. And so to wrap up, how do you guys see the future of ketamine fitting into the broader future of addiction treatment?
Good question. I think the research is ongoing.
Mhm.
We're expecting to see more and more coming out. Uh, Protocols around ketamine treatment specifically for addiction and other, substance use disorders they're going to become more and more fleshed out. We're very much in the early phases of this. My personal hope for Joyous for Therapists is to create an ecosystem that is so rich and such a connected community. People with expertise in different areas, such as addiction, can start to speak about what they're witnessing and to start to surface protocols that everyone can benefit from. It's already happening with things like neurodivergence. We have a couple of therapists communicating around, you know, how do you uh, specialize, alter, tailor. There's a word I can't think of it. Certain protocols for working with like autistic individuals. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that we really hope will start to emerge from this communication. Um, we at Joyous are unlikely to treat substance use disorder as a primary indication.
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't feel like the right move for telehealth. If someone is hoping to ketamine works specifically to help become sober, that might be a good idea. The research supports it. We think that working with a local prescriber, a local therapist is probably the best idea there.
Mhm.
But who are already in sobriety and you're looking to touch into the reasons why you're here to begin with, the anxiety, the depression, the childhood pain, the maybe it's acute trauma. It's something we didn't touch on is we're getting more and more aware of big T trauma is assault, it's warfare, it's, life threatening, it's abuse. Then there's little T trauma. There's the way that your mother just never actually made you feel seen when you were sad. There's the way that the kids on the playground made you feel like nobody likes you. And that goes deep, right? And that's half the reason many of us are reaching for that soothing agent, be it alcohol or your phone or whatever. And if you're ready to really dig into that, ideally with a therapist, but the results we're seeing with over 50% of patients not having a therapist are really impressive. Our chart review will be out hopefully later this year, and it'll be the biggest psychedelic study in history. It's currently over 60,000 people being analyzed. And most of those people, over half at least, don't have therapists. The results are very positive. If you're ready to start intentionally making contact, getting a new relationship with the sources of your own pain, this might be a good idea.
One of the things that Sharon just said that I want to just touch on is, of course, not the primary. Addiction is not the primary. But when we talk about big T trauma versus little T trauma, what I started writing about and integrating into the ways that I speak about things is also big A addiction and little A addiction. I really love it.
Yes.
When we're coming in and we're like, well, addiction is my primary thing. Addiction to what? Right? Big A addiction, or is it your little A addiction? And sometimes we're really addicted to our pain story. And that is something that ketamine can really, really get into, is just disassociating ourselves from being identified by something that has happened in our lives that is traumatic. Sometimes that's our addiction. I identify as an addict. I need to say it over and over again because it has become something that is my pain story that I need to hold on to.
Yeah. If you can be free.
What kind of what
Yeah.
would be, yeah, what would be possible?
What would be possible? As more of that story.
Yeah.
I think that is a beautiful place for us to end. And thank you so much, guys, for being on. This is such a treat. And I will include all of your information in the show notes so our listeners can check you both out and check out Joyous. And thank you all for listening to Sisters in Sobriety, and we will see you next week.